idea behind it was to renew the Opera House because there'd been no real significant upgrades made to it since it first opened back in 1973. So it was about updating all the theatre machinery, bringing the house up to code in terms of building compliance, accessibility, and a whole lot of other safety upgrades. And so we've gone through over the last 5 or so years and updated a lot of the key venues. So we kicked off with the Opera Theatre, and then we upgraded the Function Centre, which was, I don't know if you all recall, but there was a large white marquee out on the Northern Broadwalk. We brought that within the building envelope and opened up the northern facing part of Opera House. We're also done a whole number of accessibility upgrades in terms of new lifts and passageways so that people with impaired mobility can access the northern foyers. So previously there'd been people for many years that had attended the Sydney Symphony Orchestra or the Australian Ballet, but they never had the opportunity to actually go to the northern foyers and experience the entire Sydney Opera House. And so those new lifts and those new passageways have meant that they can have the full experience that everyone else has. Probably the biggest project, what we call the crown jewel of renewal, is the concert hall. And we've had that closed for the last 2 years, and we're almost at the end of that project. So we're in commissioning at the moment. So at the real pointy end, the bit where it gets really, really difficult, where you're nutting out all the fine details and getting ready to transition the project into an operating asset. And so that's keeping me and my team incredibly busy, pretty stressed, and we are almost at the end. So that will be the end of the renewal program. And then we'll be gearing up for hopefully another capital works program after that. But in terms of my overall background, I am qualified as an engineer and I've also worked as a lawyer, but I would say right now I'm more in a managerial role. So I'm fortunate though that the experience that I've had to date, I get to pull on all of it. So I started off as an engineer. I've worked as a civil engineer for a construction company and for engineering consultancy. I've worked as a major projects and construction lawyer in project finance and also infrastructure consultancy. And so I'm a bit of a Jill of all trades, master of none. And it's, in terms of my current role, it's allowed me to pull on my experience in the legal, the commercial, and the technical spheres of project planning and delivery and closeout. And so I haven't really had a particularly linear progress in terms of my my roles and professions in which I've worked, in that they haven't all directly built on top of each other, but they've all been within the ambit of the construction industry. And so I guess what you guys could probably take away from that is you don't have to have a career plan, 5-year career plan or a 10-year career plan. It's okay to take up different roles and have different experiences and figure out what you actually want to do, or maybe even more importantly, what you don't want to do. So that's where I come from in a nutshell.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting to be able to see your journey come so far to become the head of commercial and major projects. I would love to hear more about that through the panel. And Bronwyn, you are the CEO of Engineers Australia. Could you tell us a bit more about Engineers Australia and your role there?
Sure. I really liked listening to Ziggy's description of her experiences so far, and I think that's one of the things we see really broadly. Engineers are creative problem solvers, and if you add to that legal critical thinking skills and commercial capability, you can clearly go lots of places. So congratulations, that's well done. Look, at Engineers Australia, we're the peak professional body for engineers, and we look after, just quickly and give you a brief overview of what we do. We do everything from schools-based programs to accreditation of university courses, to chartered, to providing opportunities for employers and engineers to come together, for engineers and engineers to come together, to have colleges that focus in on specific technical skills. But my role as CEO is to really work at the very macro level of saying, what's our purpose? And our purpose is advancing society through great engineering. Well, how do you translate that into a strategy with priorities? How do you then bring together an amazing executive team and build the skills so we can unlock the capability of 111,000 members? If you think about what I do day to day, it's everything from working with our young engineers group who are changing the world, as you all will very soon as well, really actively questioning why do we do things the way we do, what's on the horizon for new skills, pushing us to not just be the organisation we've always been for the last 102 years. I work with external CEOs, and in fact, I'm leading a roundtable on Monday about the skill shortage. So it's a great time to be an engineering student, because I can tell you when you hit the workforce, there'll be lots of people wanting your skills and almost fighting for them. So well done. And I was reflecting on my career journey, and I've probably had and worked in about 6 or 7 different engineering sectors. And like Ziggy, I didn't have a career plan. I think I had a random career walk and looked at what was interesting, what was coming up. But, at Engineers Australia, you have to be everything as an ambassador for the profession. You have to be willing to be able to talk about the importance of engineering in the community, in society, in addressing things like climate change, water scarcity, healthcare issues, vaccine manufacturing. I was at an Australian manufacturer of safety beacons and radio equipment today. So, you do get to do everything. So put on your career plan somewhere to be the CEO. Just put it there and then work backwards.
That's definitely really inspirational to have that as a goal. And we'd like to also just mention that Engineers Australia is a sponsor for SUCE, and you will be seeing them at Careers Night next week. Also found it really interesting that both you and Ziggy didn't have a straight career path. And I think that really shows in, I guess, bringing out your own strengths and interests and seeing where you go with that. I think we'll start with the interviewing. So both you and Ziggy have mentioned your initial roles. So could you please just delve a bit more into your initial role in the industry and how you broke into the industry?
Should I go first?
Sure, go for it.
So my first role was as an engineer. I worked for, my first substantive role was as an engineer for a company called PEP. Unfortunately, they don't exist anymore, but they were a really great employee-owned, medium-sized engineering consultancy that kicked off in the early 80s. They really focused on developing their internal talent. So they didn't grow through like a really aggressive acquisition strategy that you see with some companies. They grew quite slowly and quite organically. And they had a very strong undergraduate and graduate program. So when I was at uni, they were quite prominent at things like careers nights and open days. They had a scholarship at the time as well. And they had a very structured rotation very structured set of rotations for their undergraduate and their graduate program, which allowed you to experience the variety of things that you can do as an engineer. So I worked for them as a baby site engineer in project delivery. So I worked on the St. Luke's Hospital upgrade in around 2005. I did a fair bit of work in expert witness report and dispute resolution services. So that's where at the end of a project, or hopefully not in the middle, but sometimes that does happen, you'll get engaged by a contractor or a principal in respect of a dispute. Perhaps it's about an extension of time or additional costs that are being claimed. and you go back and forensically look at what gave rise to that claim. And so you learn a lot by looking at what went wrong. And so one thing I've got to say, it's important to get front end delivery and back end experience because they all inform each other. So I did that working for them, and also risk modeling. I actually did my thesis with Emerson PEP. So it was an industry supported thesis, and it was on the retrofitting of dams because back then there was a drought as opposed to now. And we didn't have enough water. So it was about how do you get increased capacity out of all the dams. And that was a real focus of the state government at the time. So that's what I ended up doing my thesis on. And it was, I would say my time at Evans Spec was incredibly enjoyable. It's probably what's made me stick with projects. I just learnt so much and realized how flexible my engineering degree could be. But probably the most significant thing, and I know this sounds a little bit corny, but I made some really great relationships there. And I'm bringing that up because I realized that my last 2 jobs have actually been a direct result of the connections I made during that time at Evans and Peck. So that's the last 7 years of my employment have been through people that I worked with there. Well, sorry, we have sensors here because we're so sustainable that so that we don't waste electricity. Anyway, so yeah, my last 2 jobs have been with people that I worked with as a 20, 21, 22-year-old. And I continue to maintain those relationships. And so I would encourage all of you guys, when you do your work experience or in your first couple of years out, you know, they're really important times to make connections, not just with your peers, but senior people that you'll work with as well. You'll never know where opportunities might present themselves later because of those connections.
Yeah, definitely. Really emphasizes the importance of getting early experience and also the wonderful undergraduate programs that companies have these days. And for you, Bronwyn, I believe you started in a more operations role. So did you want to speak more about that?
Sure. So I started with what was then the Electricity Commission of New South Wales, which later turned into the whole decentralised split up of the power generation, power transmission in New South Wales. And I got a cadetship, and I have to tell you, having someone pay your way through university and giving you a job at the end is a gift. And if you can get it, grab it. And you do get opportunities. Sometimes they actually don't know what to do with you. If you get into a great undergraduate or intern program, again, that's a real gift. But what I learned, and I started when I first left university at power stations and then transmission line construction and then substation maintenance roles, is you learn about the rhythm of work, and you learn about working with people across all age ranges, all different qualification ranges. Some are so experienced that they almost know by going out and looking at the system, not even taking measurements, what it's going to do in the next while. So you can learn a lot from people who don't have the formal qualifications because their knowledge is built on such a large wealth of just doing it day in, day out. One thing I would say that you should never do what I did, which is I thought if I ask questions, people will think I didn't know anything. But in truth, they all knew I didn't know anything. And I missed a great opportunity to learn. And now when I've got younger engineers working for me and they say, this might be a question that you shouldn't ask, but blah, blah, blah. And you think, that's such a clever question. It makes me stop and think. So always honor the question that's in the back of your mind. That's just a pitch for being confident enough to ask a question. And can I just say, never preface it with, this is a dumb question. No. No question's dumb. It's only you might get a dumb answer back. It's always, I'm curious about something. Anyway, so I started with the Electricity Commission in New South Wales, and then I briefly went into steelmaking on the South Coast, which is where I grew up. And it was quite telling, actually, going from a government department to a very commercial operation where if the mill was down, everyone knew by the minute the impact that had on the organisation's financials, and therefore the urgency of getting the mill back up and running, getting the strip back on the rolling mill, and getting the product out the door. So it is also a great opportunity when you can marry that commercial understanding with your own technical understanding, and recognise that for companies to be here now and to be here always, some sort of commercial model is really important. And again, being curious about how does the business actually work and how do I fit into it? And then I went and did a PhD. So, and then many other things, but absolutely started with a cadetship, started with the opportunity to go on plant. And I was about the only woman on plant, but I tell you what, they know your name and you've only got to call them mate and you'll be right, and you won't insult anyone.
Yeah, I definitely love your tip about always being curious and asking questions. Yeah, and really understanding your role in the company. I think that gives a sense of purpose in your work. I really love being able to hear about your initial experience. So did you always want to work in the engineering industry? I know you guys both have bachelors of engineering, studied in engineering, but did you always want to work in this industry?
Well, I'll start this time, Ziggy, and then you can go. It was interesting thinking about why engineering. Not necessarily always wanted to work there, but on reflection, I was always project managing my poor family, from a kid. That was just what I did. I came from a large family and I project managed them, and, had every time we went on a holiday, I had a schedule and I collected all the stuff. So in hindsight, it was the right profession for me. But there are a number of things as I was thinking about why engineering. I had a vague sense that it was important and that it was real. Now, I grew up in the Illawarra where steel, mining, very heavy industry. So that was sort of real. It was hot, it was loud, and it was very visible. So for me, that represented commerce. So something about engineering was important. Then when I also, some of the less, or the more pragmatic, shall I say, pays well, it absolutely is a ticket to the world. An Australian engineering degree will allow you to travel and work anywhere. And I have worked in countries all around the world and lived overseas for a while. And it's super fun. I mean, I didn't know that at the time, but I now know it, that you do get to delve in and have a really interesting way of exploring problems and interrogating something and thinking about what would I expect to find, but I'm not finding, therefore what could be the reason, or what do I find that I didn't expect? So you develop fantastic thinking skills, and intellectually it's really interesting. So didn't always want to do it. I knew I was going to go to university. That was sort of the one thing I knew as a kid, but not necessarily what that was going to lead to. So I was lucky I stumbled on this path.
Yeah, and you were probably one of the very few female engineers in your cohort. And did you have any reality versus expectations through that experience?
Well, it was funny, and I'm sure it was the very first day of sitting in something like Elec 101, because I did an electrical engineering degree, and looking around, I was the only young woman in the class thinking, all these pimply-faced boys in this room are probably going to finish their degree. So I tell you what, I damn well sure I am too. So there was a strong sense of competition. And then I found out I was the best at maths of the small, and you do create a small group of mates, and we'd sit on the lawn and I'd help them with all their maths, and one of them might help with the physics and someone else would help with something else. So I didn't particularly feel alienated. but I absolutely felt determined and a strong sense of competition.
Yeah. And what about you, Ziggy?
No, I probably didn't even really know. I mean, I knew what construction was. I didn't ever think that I'd end up in it, that's for sure. I actually always wanted to study medicine. My mum was a GP, and she was like, just don't do it. Do anything else, just not medicine. So I ended up doing engineering and law for no real reason other than I liked maths and I also liked English. And I was like, what the hell? They're both vocational. They're both practical, and I'll figure it all out later. In terms of specifically what drew me to engineering, though, as opposed to, say, science, was, and this is a story that I hear a fair bit, is that I had examples growing up of engineers. So quite often what you hear from women who work in engineering or construction or other male-dominated industries, there was someone in their childhood, a positive influence, or someone else in their family who were engineers, for example. So in my case, my dad was an aeronautical engineer. My middle brother was studying to become one when I was in the last couple of years of school. And my oldest brother was a telecom engineer who worked for Cisco for about 10 years and now has his own ISP. And my uncle was also an engineer. So I have quite a few in my family that meant there was a familiarity in a good way with what engineers did. The topics of conversation when I was growing up were about, aeroplanes and jet engines and materials technologies, that kind of stuff. So it was language that was very familiar to me. So that's why I ended up studying it. And yeah, there's definitely no regrets in doing it. It wasn't something that was encouraged, though, of me at school. It wasn't really an option that was put forward, which seems to be in stark contrast to what you hear now, where it seems to be quite a conversation about getting women into STEM. That wasn't really a thing when I was at school. Even wanting to study 4-unit maths, that definitely, I had to push to want to do that. It was actually actively discouraged. Which probably, and this probably links in a bit with what you were saying, Bronwyn, it kind of just made me really made me want to do it as well, to prove that I could. And then did you want me to ask the question about my reality, the reality of my experience? So similar to Bronwyn, I actually had a very positive experience at uni. I remember I was actually statics. So your Elec 101 equivalent. I remember walking into my statics lecture and there were just blokes everywhere. At the time, it was the early noughties, so everyone had frosted tips and had really baggy jeans that were like halfway down their butts. And there were very few women. I can't remember how many, but you probably could have counted them on less than two hands. I don't remember anything really negative in terms of discrimination or being talked down to. I always felt like I had a seat at the table. I had some really close friends that I've made through engineering. They're actually mainly electrical and aeronautical. And I still speak to them regularly. I'm actually seeing 2 of them this weekend. So I only had positive experiences from studying. It was only probably when I actually started practicing working in engineering that I started experiencing some discrimination, I suppose, or became more aware of the reality of working in a male-dominated industry. It was not something I felt when I was studying. So.
Yeah, wow. I definitely love the determination that you guys both have to really just beat the odds. And yeah, so kind of going back to a point that you've made, Z, were there any like unique challenges as women that you faced in the industry, or like or the discrimination that you faced?
Look, I don't think there's anything specifically unique. I think I've probably experienced the same frustrations and disappointments and insecurities that many women experience, regardless of whether in a male-dominated or female-dominated or relatively equal industry. What I would say is that as I've gotten older and become more senior, the nature of the discrimination has changed. And I'll give you some examples. So when I was working on site 16, 17 years ago, everyone has heard stories of, people making lewd comments or making you feel uncomfortable or making you highly aware of the fact that you are the only female on site. So I remember there was one particular job that I was responsible for keeping the site diary up to date. So going around the site at the end of the day, taking photos, documenting the progress that had been made, the subbies that were on site and the issues that we came across. And there was one subby that always used to drive me nuts. He used to make stupid, really disgusting comments to me every day. And there was one day he grabbed my camera off me and wouldn't give it back. And I ended up just walking off. I always stay calm. Inside, I may have had a complete, ball of rage, but stay calm. That would never happen to me now. And maybe it does happen on site still, but I don't hear about it as much. I feel like the discrimination it's not as overt as I think it used to be. I could be wrong, but that's been my perception, my anecdotal experience so far. What I found as I've gotten more senior is that it's become a lot more insidious. It's a lot more low-lying. It's harder to call out. It's more that you leave a meeting and you feel like that didn't go, that that you weren't treated the way that perhaps your male colleague was. So examples could be, you could be in a meeting and a decision needs to be made and someone will talk to your male direct report rather than you because they believe that when it comes to a decision being made, particularly on something technical, it's the male in the room that should make that decision. And this is not a conscious thing. It's completely subconscious. I don't think there's any intent behind it. It's just this unconscious bias that I think almost everyone has. I've even caught myself doing it. You probably all caught yourself doing it, and you just have to make sure that you check yourself. I've also been in situations where perhaps you've got, it's like a media situation, and maybe you're dealing with a journalist. Again, they will ask you questions that are more maybe on the administrative, HR, kind of commercial, soft aspects. They won't ask you anything about the construction or the technical issues that maybe you've come across in a project. So that's how it tends to present itself now. There are also some way worse things that have happened, but they do tend to be more difficult things to call out. But they do weigh you down and they do bother you. And they're the kinds of things that, unlike the way it presented itself earlier in my career, I could look at those examples and go, that's not me, that's on you, that's your bias, that's your issues. The way it manifests itself now, sometimes you can walk out of a meeting or leave a situation and question, am I doing a good job? Did I make the right decision? And so I find that more insidious form of sexism in many ways to be more harmful because it results in more self-doubt. So that's been my experience, and that's not to discourage anyone. I guess it's just one of the fights that you fight, and hopefully it will get better as time goes on and more of these conversations are had. I guess it's sharing experience. It's what my reality is at the moment.
Yeah. And Bronwyn, do you share any similar or different experiences to Ziggy?
I really liked Ziggy's comment about being aware of unconscious biases, including the ones that we have ourselves. So I'm the CEO of Engineers Australia, and I have a chief engineer, and the chief engineer is also a woman. But when we're interviewed by journalists, because she's called chief engineer, they'll assume she's an engineer. They won't assume I'm an engineer because I'm a woman, or even though I'm the CEO. And I've actually had to go, oi, I'm an engineer too, so you can talk to me about that stuff. So it's just interesting. And these were other women just making assumptions about, a leader who's a woman won't necessarily be an engineer. And for anyone who's seen the program on the ABC called Misrepresented, where the politicians talked about being unheard, absolutely happens all the time. And you go, oi, again, you go, I just said that, you know, or people will talk over the top of you. And I have learned how to use my voice and just keep talking. You go, no, I am not going to stop talking just because you want to interrupt me. And so part of it is learning, not exactly not to take it seriously, but a bit to play the same game. If you've got the you know, you've got the energy to do it. Sometimes just think, oh, bugger it, you know, go and have a cup of tea instead. So they're the sorts of things. The same 6 young men. And after a while I went, this is not good. One, it can't be the same 6 all the time, and it can't just be young men. So as you get more senior in organizations, also start to question some of those things where, you know, we only talk about, you know, Justin and Jason and Julian and I don't know, Jack or something, when we're talking about, oh, there's an interesting project coming up. Who could we consider for that? Because it is when you're given special projects, when you're given the opportunity to do something with the executive, with the CEO, that one, you raise your visibility and you get to see the workings of someone else's mind. I know there was a time, and I actually said I wouldn't mind being considered for, it was a senior leadership role, and it was as if I hadn't spoken. What happened then? And whereas other men who were my level or slightly junior, oh, well, we'll give them a chance at something like that. Now, ultimately, I did get a big commercial role in Asia, but there were times when I did think, nah, I would have liked to have got it earlier, perhaps. And yeah, so they're the sorts of, and I think Ziggy's right. You start to question yourself. That's when you need to go for a walk and go, no, it was not me. So, you know, so you still have to be aware that there's things you can learn, and you know, you can always be learning. But I think there's also times for a very fast walk around the block and an extra shot of coffee or something to give yourself a boost.
Yeah, I guess there is some shared experiences in the industry, and probably all across different industries as well. And Bronwyn, you mentioned that, you know, you were trying to get the senior leadership role. So how did you advocate for yourself professionally, and what are some tips that you could give?
I think that's a really good question, and it's probably multifaceted. I think I paid for coaches personally throughout my career. I thought I'd heard about this thing called an executive coach. I thought, oh, okay, other people seem to be doing it. I looked around, and then I thought I need to invest in my own professional development in addition to whatever the company is going to do. So I had an executive coach that I paid for. And then the thing about working with someone every month and you're personally paying is you do the things that you agree to do before the next meeting. So that was learning to have some of those difficult conversations about, you know, I'd like to. So it wasn't just magically happened. It was a bit of hard work. I think the other one is also asking people to be a mentor, because yes, it's about what do you learn from them, but at the same time, if you're looking at people who may have the opportunity to advocate for you and be a champion. And I think that's what we can all do as we see people who impress us, or you think they might be interested in a role, is to do what Madeleine Albright said and reach across and pull someone up with you. So look for people who can advocate for you, and they'll only advocate for you if they see what you're doing. I remember listening to a very senior board director, and for women, you know, that's seen as sort of the peak of your career. Get on as many listed boards. And she said, the reality is you need to get some runs on the board first. You need people to be aware of you. So volunteer to speak at conferences, volunteer to, like Naomi and Olivia are, run a session, volunteer to build your own profile and write a piece for a magazine, join something, because people love, when you're putting a conference together, you want as many names as you can. So look at ways to raise your own profile, in addition to what can you do within your company or the university. So I think there are lots of things you can do that are completely within your control, that you don't have to rely on someone else's goodwill to wait around and do it. So I would really encourage looking for those opportunities. And if anyone's going to that event next Wednesday, have yourself an elevator pitch and go up and I think the word is buttonhole someone and tell them about yourself and what you want and what did they want. And not just tell them, ask them about themselves. People love talking about themselves. So build those conversational skills. They'll remember you. And again, if you're going to advocate for yourself, you want someone who feels like there's a connection there. So start that practice next week at the session that's going to be held.
Those are great tips that everyone can apply next week. Definitely love how you mentioned to build your own initiatives and your own profile, what you're interested in and what your skills are. And also mentoring. That's a really big thing at the moment, to be able to have the experience of someone who has, walked in your shoes. I mean, you would want to walk in their shoes. And also, the executive coaches, that's something that I haven't heard before. That's really interesting to hear from. And what about you, Ziggy?
Look, a lot of my suggestions are very similar to Bronwyn's. A lot I've experienced myself. Just on the mentoring thing, I haven't had any formal mentors, but I've had a lot of informal ones. People that I've, for example, when I worked at Evans and Peck, there were people that were senior principals at the time who took me under their wing and have, to this day, I would still, if I've got a question for them, wouldn't hesitate in texting, going, hey, are you up for a coffee? Or, let's go grab a beer or something like that after work. So informal mentorship is incredibly important. The other thing is, it's a little bit different because it's people on my team and I'm not necessarily someone's mentor when they're part of my team. But I will every month sit down with most people on my team, or maybe every 6 weeks, grab a coffee and just talk to them about what's happening. You can't disentangle your professional life from your personal life. So just to understand what's happening in both. And what I found in particular with my female staff is they have a lot of frustrations or insecurities, huge amounts of imposter syndrome, which is something I relate to myself as well. And so just having that ability to talk through that, shared experience concept is important to developing self-esteem and realizing that, you're not the only one going through it, that someone, 20 years older than you also has the same insecurities or has had the same insecurities and how they've worked through it. So it doesn't have to be through a formal mentorship. It can be through something informal. It can be through someone that you work with. It's just a way of that shared experience, of sharing your experiences. In terms of finding someone to be a champion, I've been very fortunate. I've had a couple of people that have been my champions. One is my current boss. He's pushed me to do things that make me incredibly uncomfortable, media being one of them. I don't enjoy media at all, but it's the more you do it, the easier it gets and the less it freaks you out. And so he's pushed me to do, facilitate panels, sit on panels, be members of industry committees, things like that. He's always pushed me to do things. And so it's good to find someone that at times believes in you more than maybe you believe in yourself. And so try to find someone like that. If you can find that in your boss, that's even better. You really want a boss that backs you and pushes you and wants the best for you. Even if that makes you feel incredibly uncomfortable. And even if you think, God, I don't think I can do it, if they're telling you can do it, you can probably do it. It's just you'll have to go through a bit of discomfort to get there. And you'll look back on it and you probably really have enjoyed yourself as well. And I'm just trying to think what else there was. The only other thing, it's probably on the flip side. It's not about necessarily promoting yourself or advocating for yourself. It's about not doing the opposite. So what I quite often see, I've seen this in my friends, I've seen it in my own staff, that they select out, they deselect. So there might be an opportunity for a job coming up and they'll go, well, I'm pregnant, or, you know, I have something else happening in my personal life, or, you know, it says 8 years experience on the role description. I've only got 5, so I won't apply. Don't do that. Just put your name out there, apply for the job, you know, put your hand up for the opportunity. Don't veto yourself out from the start. Go through the process. And that's something I've just noticed that women tend to do a lot more than men. So it's not about advocating for yourself in that sense. It's just about making sure you keep yourself in the running. So I think that's probably for what I've seen in terms of my staff, and also for myself, it's an important thing not to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, when you're fresh in an industry, it's very easy to, you know, be insecure and have that imposter syndrome. And yeah, really important to just make the most of your opportunities. And I'm sure you guys have gotten to the places that you are by making the most of your opportunities.
Oh, and look, imposter syndrome isn't just at the start of your career. It can haunt you through your entire career. There'll be times where it's a lot worse than others, but it's not like, you know, you get a certain number of years of experience or runs that and it just goes. It's almost good to have a little bit of it all the time because it pushes you to be better.
Yeah, definitely. And we would like to move on to this question. So what are your views to companies mandating a minimum percentage of women on their board or executive team?
Okay, I'll start with something that I observed. In Norway, they have mandated boards must be at least 40% men or women. And then you've got the bit in the middle, you can be 55, 45, 45, 55. So they mandated that. And I heard the Director General of the government department, like the, I guess, equivalent to our company's department secretaries, talk about that in Australia. And she said, oh, there was a lot of resistance to that. But in fact, what they found out was it did not undermine merit, which was the big call. It uncovered merit. They had to achieve that goal by looking differently, by having different panels, by really questioning what they said was necessary to be on a board. And I'll give you an example that I saw at the time. I was an executive of a company, and the board used to say, we can only have people who've had CEO experience can be members of our board. And there aren't that many women who've got that, except for Donald. Now, Donald hasn't been a CEO, but Donald is a very fine fellow and he's had lots and lots of experience. So they would make exceptions to men who had never been CEOs and have them on the board because they clearly had lots of good experience, but they wouldn't do that for women because you had to have been a CEO. And they did not see the contradiction at the time. This was about 15 years ago. So as we know in engineering generally, if you put a measure in place, people will start to change their behaviours, will start to really question the way they've always done things, because Einstein or someone said, if you always do what you've always done, expect a different outcome, then that's a version of insanity. And therefore, doing something like this will make you approach the challenge of getting fantastic women into your positions than you would otherwise by just saying it's all about merit. Because at times when you look at, say, all male boards and you think if that's the definition of merit, then heaven help us, because, it's not very edifying to see some people's version of merit. So I think mandating minimum percentages has a real benefit for the company, and it absolutely then has merit later on. It takes time to get this going. And I did want to pick up actually on a point that, and great advice that Ziggy gave about keep yourself in the running. Some companies, and I think the CSIRO is a case in point, is that if the executives see that you are potentially ready for a role, unless you opt out, you're automatically considered to be in the running. So a really bold, there's lots of companies who are trying quite bold things to make sure that that sort of general trend of women in particular not to put themselves in the running, but to actually put themselves out, they've changed that dynamic to take some of the pressure off the, oh, I'm not sure if I want to go through the effort. So I think there are some really interesting things happening more broadly in industry. But getting back to what are my views, I think it's got real merit. There's merit in that one.
Yeah, and would definitely change how like human resources would really find these people, and how they're really considering what's necessary for people to be on the board. And what about you, Ziggy? What are your views on this?
Yeah, so look, there are lots of arguments for and against quotas, and like Bronwyn said, the meritocracy argument is the one that people peddle the most. But yeah, it's an erroneous assumption. Nepotism and jobs for the guys is a real thing, and quotas really just help to, in a temporary way, help to level the playing field. And so I think there is real merit to quotas as well. That said, I think their efficacy depends so much on how they're implemented, because they can be very blunt instruments. And if their implementation is not well informed, I think you can do more harm than good, but they're incredibly effective at overcoming the inertia of male-dominated industry. So I'll give you some examples. You've got to look at where. Are you talking parliament? Are you talking boards? Are you talking senior exec? Are you talking grads and other entry-level positions? Why are you doing it? A lot of the time people say it's about equality, and equality is a commendable goal in itself, but tying it to a measurable outcome will help with the messaging and in turn make it more acceptable. So, the obvious one with parliaments, quotas ensure there that the parliament truly reflects the population it represents, which is 50%, around about 50% female. In companies, it's often about economic drivers. So they've found that female managers in companies make the company more profitable. The share price of ASX listed companies is said to be, I think it's about 5% higher in ASX listed companies with female CEOs compared with male CEOs. Not entirely sure how they come up with that measurement, but it's one of the statistics that you hear announced quite regularly, and you see in a fair bit of journalism. There also are, other factors around improved board governance and improved decision making and oversight of management. And then you've got grads and just your direct employees, where you recognise the importance of diversity to breed thought and innovation and encourage different ways of thinking and approaching problems, better teamwork, having a more well-rounded cohort. What's the percentage that you're going for? You don't want 10%, because then you don't have the critical mass, and then the women that are recruited or promoted through that quota system might then be open to tokenism and stigmatization. So maybe you want something more like 30, 40, 50%, so that you do have that critical mass. So these are all things that you need to think about, and whether a quota is going to work in your context. But yeah, I do think they're incredibly effective at accelerating change and driving change, and overcoming that inertia. But yeah, my 2 cents.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of factors to consider when making those mandates, but also to be able to drive change in industries. That's a really cool way to do it. So as we move forward to the end of our panel, there's one last question that I'd like to ask. So what are you hoping to achieve in your career next?
You can go first, Bronwyn.
I want to achieve a very good retirement. So look, my executive career is actually coming to a close. I'm leaving Engineers Australia at the end of next week, and I'll more than likely take up more board roles. I've got, I chair a cooperative research centre at the moment looking at innovation in the building and construction sector called Building 4.0 CRC. I'm on the board of a Australian manufacturing company building safety beacons and radios in Western Sydney, an amazing company. And I'm on the board of a company building medical devices to treat cardiac arrhythmia, a very cool implantable device that goes into the left ventricle of the heart. And can I quickly do a digression? When I worked at Cochlear and now working with this company that makes an implantable device for the heart, I knew nothing about biology because I thought physics, maths, and chemistry was what's important, and biology was wasn't a serious science. I reckon it's the most amazing science because finding out how engineering and biology come together. So what's next for my career is, look, just interesting stuff. I'm on an advisory on modern manufacturing and having a bit of fun around what engineering's role is in advancing society. And for me, especially in the area of medical devices and manufacturing, which is something that I really came to love. And if the borders open up soon enough, some travel as well. So that's my career ambitions.
Wow. Yeah, really was, lovely to have you as the exec, and really cool to see what you will be up to in the future as well, and all on your board and all your ventures there. And what about you, Ziggy? What are you hoping to achieve next?
Yeah, look, I think I probably alluded to it a bit earlier. I'm not much of a planner when it comes to my career. All of my job opportunities I felt come from left field. I never expected I'd be doing what I ended up doing each time I took on a new role. So I don't know what I'm going to be doing next. I'm open to opportunities. I've always got my ear to the ground. I do love what I currently do. What I do know for sure is that I'll definitely be managing a team because it's the best and worst part of my job. And I think Bronwyn, you probably understand what I mean by that. It's just so amazing to see your team develop, or people in your team to develop and grow in their careers, but it can also be an incredibly challenging part of your job. And I always want to make sure that I'm stretched. So as soon as I start getting comfortable, I start getting itchy feet. So you always want to feel like you're being challenged, at least my personality type does. So I like commercially and technically challenging projects. And so, I don't know, I'll see what comes up. It's kind of exciting not knowing, to be honest.
Yeah, that's definitely really cool. Yeah, definitely in, being stretched and always being challenged in wherever you are, and always learning. That's really great. So really thank you.
I'm so sorry about this.
All good. Really thank you guys for being on the panel today. And Olivia, would you like to take it away for Q&A, a really quick Q&A?
Yes, of course. I will, I'll just add myself here. I will make the Q&A quick. I myself have really enjoyed this panel. It's been one of my favorites for sure. Have enough questions myself to cover the whole thing, but I'll just share my screen quickly and the questions will be up there. Everyone watching, if you have questions, be sure to put them on the Slido. I'm not sure what we'll have time for, but first question that was liked by quite a lot of the people in the Slido was, what can men in the engineering industry do, in your opinion, to make the industry and the workforce more inclusive for women? Whoever wants to start.
Look, what I mentioned before in terms of being aware of your own biases and things that might make other people uncomfortable. So for example, like I said, if you're in a meeting, talk to everyone in that room. It doesn't matter who you think they are, what their role is. Everyone has a place at that table, and make eye contact with them. Introduce yourself to them. Ask them questions. And so just be inclusive. You know, the way you send emails, don't say dear gents. Say hi everyone, hi all. You know, it sounds like such a simple thing, but it goes a long way to making everyone feel included.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think someone would think of that initially.
I get it all the time. All the time. I often get dear Mr. Napier because, you know, someone in my role should be male, apparently. So just being aware of those kinds of things. And then also kind of a bit parallel to this, not strictly necessarily down to men in the engineering industry, but around paid parental leave. If you're a fellow and you're in an organization that is fortunate enough to offer you paid parental leave, use it so that maybe your wife or your partner can go back to work, you know, have same opportunities that you have. So take advantage of those opportunities. The more people that do it, the more that will take it up in turn. So I think that's a big issue that's getting more and more airtime, that, you know, one thing to have it, but also make it culturally acceptable to use it.
Do you have anything to add, Bronwyn?
I think just being aware for all of it, just that everyday sexism, you know, just being alert to it. But again, don't beat yourself up too much. There'll be times when you fall into the trap of making assumptions. But the best thing is the little person sitting on your shoulder just gives you a nudge, so that you can be aware next time. And as you know, and support your women colleagues. And I love Ziggy's point about make the assumption that everyone in the room is there for a reason of contributing to the meeting, and therefore make eye contact and have a chat and find out what they know.
Yeah, I think the way you were talking about unconscious bias earlier, I think it was both of you, but yeah, I think that was super interesting. Another one was, how have the challenges for women in engineering changed in the last 10 years, do you think?
You can I just be a bit flippant, but you can now get PPE that actually fits. When I first started working, fortunately my mother knew how to sew, but we would get issued with King G work trousers that when you're a woman just doesn't fit. And the shoes were all men's shoes. Now I happen to have large feet. Look, the challenges have changed in that sometimes there is more women on site, so there's more opportunities. So maybe the challenge is you'll be spoilt for choice, and you know, then you'll have to try and decide, well, what is it you want to do with that choice? But you will still find the people, and I have been in Engineers Australia is 102 years old, and there's times when someone will start talking about 1994, and I you know, you will find people who will want to hark back to the past. So I don't know that the challenges are all that different about women in the workforce. You will find times when you're ignored and overlooked and someone wants to speak over the top of you. But there's a lot to grab hold of and have a great career. Yeah, so.
Yeah, thank you. Ziggy, in the name of saving time, I might ask you a different question that's not on the screen, but it was on the Slido. Someone asked, you were speaking about imposter syndrome before, and someone asked if there were if you had any strategies or ways that you, obviously it's something that kind of has no solution, but strategies or ways that you deal with imposter syndrome and self-doubt and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you know what the advice is that I got from my CEO when I told her about it? No, it probably would have been close to 5 years ago. I was pretty new to the organization. She looked at me and goes, you know what? When you get to the door, think about it and just drop it and walk in and act like you're the most confident person. And at the time, I was like, you don't get it. But it's true. I tried it, and so much of your imposter syndrome is you talking to yourself, telling yourself that you can't do it. Most of the time when you actually get in there, you get in front of a panel or you're presenting to a group of people, maybe you're just you're managing a design meeting, it actually tends to evaporate. Where imposter syndrome actually is the biggest issue I found is, you know, late at night after a long day and your mind starts churning and you start questioning all these things that you said, or maybe on a Saturday morning after a long week, then that's where you start questioning yourself again. But I would say a lot of it is how you talk to yourself. No, that sounds a little bit trite, but it's true. Also recognize that it will come in waves. So there'll be points in your career where you feel, particularly if you've been in a job for a while, where you just don't feel it anymore. You're quite comfortable. You know what you're doing. You know your team. You know your strengths. You know your weaknesses. But where it will present and rear its ugly head again is when you have a new job and you feel like you're being stretched. So maybe just accept it. Sometimes it is part of growth. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes being uncomfortable is a good thing.
Great advice.
So just accept it sometimes.
Yeah.
Roll with it.
Yeah, that's something that not a lot of people say as well. I think sometimes people are always trying to think of like very specific strategies to try and overcome them. But I think what your CEO said as well, simple but great, just gets it done. I think we're quite a bit past 6, so I might pass back to Naomi and she can do the conclusion and I'll just stop the share. Thank you for that though.
Yeah, and so we'd just like to give a really big thank you to both Ziggy and Bronwyn. It's an absolute privilege to be able to have you guys on the panel and for you guys to share your wisdom and your experience as women in the industry. And it's great to have you here. And I'm sure everyone had a really great experience hearing from you guys. So we'd just like to ask for everyone to put on the cameras for a really nice screenshot of today's event. Yeah, so please put on your cameras, guys.